I could feel the polished oak of the dining table pressing into my palms as I traced invisible patterns on its surface, my fork untouched. Mom had made her famous roasted chicken. Dad was talking about his new investment, and everything looked picture perfect. From the outside, I was the golden daughter, smiling politely, nodding at jokes I didn't find funny. Inside, though, my chest was tight with memories I couldn't shake. My phone buzzed on the table. I glanced down. A message from an unknown number. "Don't drink the juice. They're planning to drug you." I froze, the orange glow of the kitchen light reflecting in my eyes, my silk blouse brushing against my arm as if mocking my sudden tension. Heart-thumping, I felt the sharp divide between the woman they saw, composed, successful, untouchable, and the girl who had once been trapped under the weight of their control. I watched my parents pour themselves glasses of apple juice, laughing like nothing could touch them. The aroma of cinnamon from Mom's dessert hit my nose, but I barely noticed. My mind raced. Is this a joke? Should I act normal? The little hairs on my arms stood on end. Every instinct in me screamed to move, to avoid that juice. And just like that, dinner became a minefield. One wrong sip, one wrong gesture, and everything could spiral. I smiled politely anyway, holding my glass of water a little tighter, pretending the warning didn't exist, while every nerve in my body was alert. I remember the summer I turned 21, sitting on the creaky hardwood floor of my childhood bedroom, tears staining the edges of a worn-out journal. Mom had just stormed out after yet another argument, her voice sharp, dripping with disappointment, while Dad leaned back in his recliner, silent, arms crossed, watching me flounder like a fish out of water. "You'll never make it on your own," Mom had said. "Don't expect us to support any of your crazy ideas." My hands shook as I clutched a small, leather-bound notebook, a gift from my grandmother, who had passed away the previous year. Inside, she had written, "Never let anyone tell you what you're worth. Your strength is your own. Guard it." At the time, it felt like a fragile lifeline. The words seemed impossibly big compared to the tiny apartment I'd grown up in and the suffocating rules my parents imposed. That night, I packed a single suitcase. My younger self, trembling, terrified, and yet burning with a spark of defiance, stepped out into the darkness of the city. I remember the sting of every whispered insult Mom had thrown at me over the years, the guilt, the shame, the humiliation of feeling like a disappointment. But beneath it all, there was a seed of something else: determination. I found work wherever I could, waitressing, tutoring, odd jobs that left my feet sore and my heart weary. I spent nights hunched over that leather notebook, sketching plans, writing down dreams, reminding myself that I was allowed to choose my own life. Every step away from home felt like a small victory and yet a terrifying act of rebellion. I can still feel the lump in my throat as I locked the apartment door behind me that first morning, the way my hands had clenched around the keys like they were lifelines. That suitcase was light compared to the weight I carried in my mind, but it represented something monumental: freedom. For the first time, I wasn't answering to anyone else's expectations. I was answering to me. It was terrifying. It was liberating. And it was only the beginning. Starting over wasn't glamorous. I remember the first apartment I rented, a tiny studio with cracked windows and a stubborn radiator that rattled all night. But every inch of that space felt like my own. No rules, no lectures, no judgment. Just me and the echo of my grandmother's words. Your strength is your own. I found a mentor, Mrs. Caldwell, a seasoned marketing executive in New York who had built her empire from the ground up. She spotted something in me I hadn't even fully acknowledged yet: ambition tempered with empathy, a relentless drive to prove myself, and an instinct for strategy. I remember the first time she called me into her office and said, "You've got potential, but you'll have to fight for every inch. Don't expect it to be easy, and don't apologize for being brilliant." Those words hit harder than any criticism from my parents ever had, but in a good way. I worked tirelessly, often into the early hours, learning the ropes of digital campaigns, sales strategy, and client management. Nights were long, caffeine-fueled, and lonely. There were days when self-doubt gnawed at me like a persistent shadow, reminding me of every taunt I'd endured growing up. But each small win, the first big client I landed, the first marketing campaign I spearheaded that turned a profit, was a quiet affirmation that I was capable. I learned to be careful, to keep my life compartmentalized. Social media was misleadingly mundane. Vacation photos, casual brunches, a few half-hearted updates. My family had no idea I was running campaigns for Fortune 500 companies, negotiating contracts in the six-figure range, and gradually building my own financial independence. I relished the secrecy, a quiet power growing beneath their radar. The symbolic notebook from my grandmother stayed on my desk, worn at the edges from constant flipping, reminders of every lesson, every plan, every late-night strategy scribbled in its margins. I decorated my apartment with pieces that reflected my taste, not my parents' expectations: minimalist furniture, abstract art, and a tiny corner for plants that reminded me of growth and patience. Every time I opened that notebook, I remembered the weight of their doubt. And every time I closed it, I felt the pride of proving that I could create something of my own, a life I didn't need permission to live. The little girl who had trembled in my childhood bedroom was still there, tucked inside, but she was stronger now. Fierce, independent, and quietly unstoppable. It was a long, lonely climb, but I was shaping a future that belonged to me. And as my career soared and my savings grew, I finally realized that the girl who had once been dismissed, ignored, and underestimated had transformed into a woman who could never be overlooked again. I never intended for my parents to see this side of me so soon, but the invitation had arrived anyway, a family gathering at a chic rooftop restaurant in Manhattan. As I stepped out of the cab, I felt the hum of the city beneath my heels, the cold glass of my champagne flute in hand, and the subtle thrill of knowing they had no idea what was coming. The elevator doors opened to a private dining room, soft light bouncing off abstract art and polished mahogany. My parents were there, seated as if waiting to lecture, to patronize, to remind me of the girl I used to be. Dad's tie was crooked, Mom's smile tight, and their eyes scanned the room with a mix of expectation and barely concealed judgment. I walked in with my shoulders back, head high, every movement deliberate. My designer dress whispered elegance, a quiet announcement that the girl they had tried to control was no longer invisible. Their eyes followed me, curiosity mixed with suspicion. I sat, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I let them take in the surroundings, the carefully curated art that reflected my taste, the sleek modern table settings, the discreet but unmistakable signs of success, a cityscape view from the 100th floor, a private concierge service, menus customized for our dietary preferences. Finally, I spoke. "It's been a long time since you saw me this way," I said, voice calm, measured, but with an edge they hadn't heard before. "I think it's time you understood exactly who I am now." I laid out my achievements slowly, deliberately. My voice didn't tremble as I described the companies I'd consulted, the campaigns I'd run that had landed millions in revenue, the financial empire I had quietly built over the years. I watched as their expressions shifted: disbelief, confusion, shock, and then a flicker of shame. Every sneer they had once aimed at me was gone, replaced with a sudden realization that the girl they had underestimated had far surpassed anything they imagined. Mom's lips parted, but no words came. Dad's arms, once crossed in judgment, now hung limp at his sides, as if the weight of my truth had flattened him in place. I could see the gears turning in their heads, trying to reconcile the image of the obedient daughter they had always expected with the powerful woman sitting before them. Then I reached for my grandmother's notebook, placing it on the table so they could see it. This is what I carried with me when I left. Every word, every lesson, every plan. It guided me, reminded me that I was worth more than anyone else's expectations. And it brought me here, to a place where I answer only to myself. They were silent, absorbing the weight of my journey. The juice on the table went untouched, though I knew my earlier warning had saved me from more than just a sip. It had saved me from doubt, from fear, and from allowing them to diminish the woman I had become. I leaned back, watching them, feeling the power shift subtly but unmistakably. They had come expecting the daughter who had once been vulnerable, pliable, dependent. Instead, they faced a woman who had built her own world and wasn't about to let anyone, not even them, shake it. The room felt heavy with unspoken words. I could see it in their eyes, the realization that I was no longer the girl they could dismiss or control. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't need to. The silence spoke volumes. I had the upper hand now, and with it came a responsibility. To set boundaries, to reclaim the respect I had once been denied, and to decide how much of myself I would extend to them. "I'm willing to help," I said calmly, "but on my terms." Their faces shifted uneasily. I continued, voice steady, precise, each condition carefully chosen. "Mom, I want you to pursue your passions, whatever they may be, without guilt. No more criticizing others to feel in control. And Dad, I expect honesty and accountability. No more dismissing your responsibilities or belittling my choices." I paused, letting the words settle. "I'm not here to punish you," I added, "but I am here to ensure that we don't repeat the same patterns that held me back. I've spent years building a life on my own terms. If you want to be part of it, you'll respect that. And you'll change what needs changing in yourselves first." Mom's lips trembled, and I saw the first flicker of understanding in her eyes. Dad's jaw tightened, but the tension wasn't defiance anymore. It was reckoning. I continued, outlining practical steps, attending therapy, learning to communicate without manipulation, and actively supporting each other's dreams rather than undermining them. These weren't punishments. They were conditions for a healthier, mutual relationship. I placed my grandmother's notebook in the center of the table again. "This isn't just about me," I said. "It's about the lessons I learned about resilience, independence, and integrity. If you want a place in my life, you'll carry some of those lessons too." For the first time in years, I noticed them listening, really listening. There was no interruption, no arguing, only an acknowledgement that the rules had changed. I could see it in the way they straightened in their chairs, in the tentative way Mom reached for a pen to take notes, as if she were trying to memorize not only what I said, but what I had become. I felt a quiet satisfaction, a mix of compassion and authority, knowing that I could now navigate these relationships from a position of strength. I was offering them a chance, not out of obligation, but because I had the power to define the terms. And for the first time, the dynamic was clear. I was no longer the dependent daughter. I was the woman they had underestimated, the architect of her own destiny, and the one deciding the rules now. The juice sat untouched between us, a small but potent symbol. I didn't need to say it, they understood. I had survived, I had thrived, and I had the wisdom to decide how and when to let them in. Weeks passed after that dinner, and the changes, subtle at first, began to show. Mom started taking long walks in the mornings, joining a local art class she had always dismissed as frivolous. She sent me photos of her watercolor paintings, and I felt a warmth I hadn't known was possible, pride in her, untainted by criticism or expectation. Dad began to attend therapy sessions, tentative but sincere, learning to articulate feelings he had once buried under sarcasm and control. He asked for advice, listened without interrupting, and even acknowledged some of the mistakes he had made, the moments he had failed to support me or understand me. I watched them grow with cautious optimism, a quiet satisfaction blooming in my chest. My life hadn't been easy. The scars of my past were still there, etched deep beneath my calm exterior. But the woman I had become was stronger, wiser, and grounded in her own worth. I had weathered fear, betrayal, and doubt, yet here I was, a life fully claimed, fully my own. One evening, I found myself back in my apartment, the leather-bound notebook resting on my desk. I opened it, running my fingers over the familiar words. My grandmother's advice hadn't lost its power. Never let anyone tell you what you're worth. Your strength is your own. Guard it. Every line resonated as strongly as the day I had first read it, a full-circle reminder of the journey I had undertaken, from vulnerability to empowerment, from fear to mastery of my own life. I poured myself a glass of water, not juice, and smiled. The city lights outside my window shimmered like a constellation of hard-won victories, reflecting the life I had meticulously built, piece by piece, choice by choice. I had learned to protect myself, to trust my instincts, and to define my own rules. And in doing so, I had redefined my family, not through control or manipulation, but through strength, compassion, and clarity. I took a deep breath and whispered to myself, almost as a final vow, I am my own anchor, my own compass, my own home. And for the first time, it felt absolute.